Despite the wonderful server I built for all my fans, there remains many decrepit rundown cesspools. One such place is known as my suggestions channel. Every day I look through some pretty normal suggestions. Things like people asking me to build an entire plane for them, blueprint and everything, to the same people spamming supersonic biplane 65 times in every chat thinking it's even remotely funny. Truly a diverse channel, isn't it? We could have a whole National Geographic nature documentary on these creatures. Well, besides the intentionally ironic ideas, there are some genuinely dumb and ill-educated ideas there. These ideas aren't just common in my channel, however. These ideas are some of the most prevalent dumb ideas in the aviation community and make for some common misconceptions. So for any of those who may be newer to the hobby, this aims to clear some of those up. Today's stupid flavor of the day is the Stealth A-10. We all know and love the A-10 as it's one of the most unique combat craft out there. With its low combat speeds, relatively low operating cost, and gun which can only be described as ear candy to most, unless the pilot mistakes you for an enemy. I'm sure the sound was particularly lovely to any warrior IFVs in Iraq in 2003. Either way, despite its flaws, the A-10 has certainly captured the hearts of many combat aviation fans. That being said, the A-10, like most other planes, certainly have some other problems that need to be addressed before the video. Let's look a little bit back in time, back when the A-10 was built. It kind of had a very specific purpose. It was more or less supposed to be a vehicle that had high loiter times, low operating costs, and a pretty decent combat range, as well as, most importantly, good air-to-ground capability. It completed this with large, straight wings, cheap and reasonably efficient low-speed engines, many hardpoints, and of course an armor-penetrating high-velocity cannon on the nose. I mean, it's iconic, right? The GAU-8 Avenger is probably one of the most celebrated guns on the planet. Iconic for the noise and ground support capabilities it offers. That being said, the A-10 is a reasonably designed aircraft and for its time made perfect sense. Unfortunately for all of us and those warriors in Iraq, in the modern climate, the A-10 struggles to fill any niche in the world of air combat. It's far too expensive for counterinsurgency operations or essentially attacking people instead of a major nation. And its lack of effective precision ordnance systems has led to a lack of complete ground support capability in counterinsurgency combat. I mean, purely relying on optical detection for ground attack missions doesn't sound the best anyways, especially in the modern age. The Mark I eyeball has served us well for a long time, but I'm sure it can't do everything. On top of that, CAS missions just generally have a higher chance of friendly fire, so I can't really blame this on the design of the A-10. Except I also can because it can't mount Hellfires or any, decent precision ordnance for counterinsurgency. In terms of fighting an actual superpower instead of poorly funded rebel groups, the A-10 lacks high altitude capabilities, maneuverability, stealth, or any form of real survivability against any mutual opponent to the United States. Because of the state of modern combat, the A-10 sort of fills a niche in military aviation that doesn't really exist. Keeping the A-10 flying provides almost no direct advantage to the military, although one could argue that it provides moral support to the ground troops. After all, to many of the ground troops, the gun still is one of the best sounding things out there. In order to keep the A-10 relevant, many people have proposed a variety of ideas, varying from weird to downright stupid. From general minor improvements to the vehicle's air-to-ground capability, all the way to the wild and cursed supersonic redesigns, probably one of the most outlandish ideas for improving this iconic piece of technology is the Stealth A-10. Numerous games, movies, and pieces of media have made Stealth A-10s, and they're always hilariously dumb. Now, the idea of a Stealth A-10 in the first place is already pretty dumb. The whole point of the A-10 is that in some relative semblance of a sense, it is cheap. But on top of that, instead of making a believable Stealth A-10, they come up with this just complete garbage. And I mean, yeah, the A-10 is a hard shape to make stealth, but really, all you did was add lines to it. I'm sure they're meant to look futuristic, and like not specifically stealth, but it bothers me that designers think just making things slightly more angular makes it stealth. Like if I take some 4-year-old child and ask it to scribble over a drawing of an A10, does it become stealthy? No, it becomes a drawing that a 4-year-old scribbled over. So instead today, we're going to be trying to make a realistic stealth A10. No matter how stupid the idea is, we're going to engineer this thing to the best of our abilities. We're going to take the A10's gun, wings, and engines, put them in their initial positions as the real A10, and then move those components as little as possible to try and make a future, stealthier version of the A10 that might be able to take on superpowers. Although that being said, isn't that kinda just the point of the F-117? So why would we make a stealth A10 again? Maybe we got so embarrassed that Serbia shot him down that we just had to make another plane instead. Who knows why we'd actually make this thing, I sure as hell don't. But on top of that, we're also going to be looking at complaints from real-life A10 pilots and trying to improve upon those to truly make a future generation of A10. Now, not to confuse any of you, the goal of this isn't just to cobble together some stupid flying device that works in some comedic way abusing the game engine and then laugh at the fact that it flies. No, with this series I want to make a flying vehicle that may be somewhat believable to someone on the outside. Maybe after this video you can show your grandma and go, "Hey look grandma, it's a stealth A10. And she'd just chuckle and say, "That's right, sweetie," and completely forget the interaction ever happened in the first place. But by putting this plane in the minds of people who don't care, I believe we can convince at least one person that it's real. But before we design a stealth A10, we need to take a look at what the A10 was designed for as well as why it's so bad for stealth in the first place. But who am I kidding, the A10 is already stealthy, it just cleverly disguises itself as a passenger jet flying around the battlefield with the largest radar return known to man. The A10 was first flown in 1972 to provide combat air support, or CAS, with a better delivery system than previous vehicles of the American Vietnam War. To accomplish this, the A10 had to be designed with low costs, high survivability, high loiter times, as well as the ability to carry a large amount of payload. To complete this, some things had to be sacrificed. Agility and speed were the first to go in the design, instead utilizing high bypass turbofan engines for the low speed thrust and efficiency. The aircraft was designed with defense from ground troops in mind, its colder engines placed high on the fuselage with plenty of countermeasures. This allows the A10 to fly in a higher altitude bracket than its low intensity counterparts such as the Cessna 02, while still being cold and defendable against IR seekers, thus avoiding that pesky ground fire and man pads with ease. Now this is cool and all, but why is it necessarily bad for stealth? Well, first of all, the A10 is a cheap plane. No stealth plane is cheap no matter what. So, just for the sake of this conceptual video, we're going to be sweeping that one under the rug and hoping no one notices. Moving on, let's actually take a look at the A10 here. The most important thing to stealth is covering up reflective surfaces. So that includes compressor blades, the gun, and Jimmy's beautiful face. All these things need coverings to be hidden on the radar. Because of this, my A10 design will include radar-reduced nose cone, inlets, S-ducts, and RCS-reduced leading edges of the wings to minimize frontal cross-section. On top of this, for some reason, one of the biggest misconceptions about stealth is the weapons loadout. To be a true stealth aircraft, an internal weapons bay is more or less required. The rounded edges, rough surfaces, and lack of radar-absorbent coatings on your typical missile or bomb completely ruin an aircraft's stealth capability, which is why all modern stealth aircraft include an internal weapons bay. While I won't specifically make an animated weapons bay for the sake of the video, I will show off what would be put inside using a friend of mine's custom 3D models for various air-to-ground munitions. Thank you to user with the name of Invalid Crow on the Discord server for making all of these. Feel free to check out any of his content on the Flyout official Discord server. Lastly, like any good stealth plane, the Stealth A10 will require a decent sensory suite. While the major internals are the same between these two aircraft, the airframe will be completely different and more adept at supporting more useful modifications to avionics than the traditional A10. So how would I be building this thing? Well, if you visited my channel more than once, you might know already that I am making this thing in Flyout. It's easily the highest fidelity aircraft building simulator on the market, and it will allow me to design a somewhat realistic 3D model of what the Stealth A-10 could and probably should look like. So let's start with the A-10 part of the plane. I started by modifying a 3 view of the A-10 to be completely transparent and uploading these files as a blueprint using the in-game blueprint editor tool. I then used a cube with equal dimensions to the A-10 to overlay the blueprints on the X, Y, and Z axes, all with appropriate size and positions to the real A-10. Using these 2D blueprints, I was able to figure out the exact position and size of the wings, engine, and gun on the A-10. These, along with general shape, would be just about the only actual design choices I would be incorporating from the Warthog. This is because, in order to realistically make the A-10 stealth, you need to build basically an entirely different aircraft. This is because of the specificity of stealth shaping and what it actually means to make an aircraft stealthy. For example, a stealth aircraft shape isn't always necessarily stealthy. For example, the exact dead flat top and bottom, many stealth aircraft have a very large cross-section, ignoring the radar absorbent coating. This is because it's simply impossible to make a plane zero from every angle. The goal of a stealth design is to simply make the plane radar stealth, at least in shape, from the angles that matter. Radar, like many other things in our life, is a wave. So the easiest way to visualize how it works is with another wave. Tell me, when you were a kid, did you ever throw a rock into a lake? When you throw a rock into a lake, it sends out waves, just as a radar would send out an EM microwave. Now let's say the waves hit a cylinder placed in the water nearby. Now what you might notice is that the cylinder bounces off these waves in every direction. Now instead, imagine a sleek wedge similar to the shape of an F-117 or a similar stealth fighter. If those waves were to hit this cutout, the waves wouldn't simply bounce back and instead would just be deflected sideways. It almost seems like the shape sort of cuts through the waves instead of reflecting them. You can try it yourself. Either use the Ripple editor, I'll provide a link in the description below, or go to your local lake and start throwing stones in the water. Of course, the water only generates waves in 2 dimensions and can't simulate the intricacies of materials, 3-dimensional design, or anything like that, but it makes for a fantastic learning environment for why stealth planes are shaped the way they are. Next, radars don't see everything. There are radar transparent materials as well as radar reflective materials. Your typical radar transparent materials are things like plastics, some organic materials such as wood, acrylics, and a few other, mostly non-conductive materials. Now, instead, your radar reflective materials are essentially just all of your metals in their most essential sense. Now, a question many people have is why not just build your plane out of transparent materials? And well, the answer lies in the name, radar transparent. That means that the radar waves keep moving through them until they find something to bounce off of. That might be internals, that might be wires, the engines, your weapons, your motors, your radar, could be anything. So instead, we'd rather construct our plane out of materials that we can control rather than reflect materials that we can't. More on that later though. But essentially, that's why people claiming that the Horton 229 is a stealth plane because it was using wood, that's just complete nonsense. Now, unfortunately, a pure stealth A-10 is just impossible. The straight wings and very high diameter engines are just not conducive to stealth. However, I will be doing what I can to minimize the effects of those in this design. The first thing we need to focus on was the engine pods. The A-10 had very high diameter and very reflective engines. We needed a way to minimize that. These sort of oversized engine pods I'm building on screen now were my solution. Featuring sharp angles on the sides and front, these engine pods were intentionally oversized to give me the room to reflect radar correctly. I also left room in the top of the engine pods for variable geometry exhaust and active exhaust coolers, both important features on a stealth vehicle to reduce its thermal signatures from any IRST sensors that may be scanning for it. Luckily, the A-10's high bypass turbofans were already perfect for keeping the plane as cool as possible. However, that being said, the engines given on this aircraft were not in fact perfect replicas of the A-10's General Electric TF34-100 engines. Instead, the engines were a little bit closer to a civilian variant of the engine denoted as the CF34-8C. This is because, I'm not kidding, the civilian variants are both newer and just about better in every way. barely increased mass flow rate for a pretty significant increase in thrust. These engines at low speeds would be able to maintain the same efficiency as the A10's engines while providing more power and thrust for climbing and maintaining high speeds, all in an engine with nearly identical diameter and size. This is also a common complaint among real-life A10 pilots, so I saw it as an opportunity to improve the design and make theoretical pilots of the vehicle happier with zero actual drawbacks. Moving on to the nose of the aircraft, one of the most important factors for the stealth shaping was covering the gun. The nose was designed with sleek, sharp angles and edges expected to reduce radar return, while the gun was hidden away in a gun compartment that would only open when firing, which we would be modeling later in the video. Finally, the canopy was designed in a way that would also theoretically deflect radar waves from almost any front, side, or rear aspects of the aircraft. On a stealth aircraft, the materials to construct the canopy are not usually radar absorbent due to the need to see through the cockpit. As a result, the canopy is instead made radar reflective. The canopy is already shaped to deflect radar waves, so having a reflective canopy is far better than those waves penetrating the canopy and instead bouncing off those jagged edges such as the pilot, the dashboard, and all those other oddly angled internal parts. This is commonly thought to be why the F-22 canopy has a golden sheen, and also, if I were to wager a bet, the F-35's and Sukhoi 75's cockpits are probably more than just plain radar transparent acrylic. The plane in real life would be covered in radar absorbent material, abbreviated RAM. These materials are usually designed as a matrix of radar reflective materials. These materials cause as many reflections as possible inside of the matrix in order to weaken the beam and transfer all of its energy into heat, thus absorbing it. Studies into these materials and how to effectively transfer all energy from microwave radiation has been a science for a very long time, and unfortunately for me, many of the engineering tactics are very classified, so I can't really provide much information on them. I mean, what am I gonna do? Turn a microwave magnetron into a radar emitter and see which engineered metal structure heats up the most to test RAM coatings? I mean, that'd be a really fun way of doing it as long as you safely adhere to the radiation warnings. Maybe if I actually go just like full mad scientist insane and start making absurd projects, I'll do that. Also on that note, that's why you're not supposed to put metal in a microwave. Instead of heating it, it just reflects it everywhere and can damage the microwave as a result. If you see a video one day that just says something like testing radar absorbent materials with a microwave, just know that I've probably gone insane. After all this was done, it was time to design the ducting of the engine intakes. Much like many traditional modern stealth designs, the Stealth A10 would feature S-ducting, which is exactly what it sounds like. The intake duct is intentionally made long and curvy to hide the compressors from the radar. For those who aren't particularly familiar, the compressor blades of a turbine are ridiculously loud on the radar with all those spinny reflective blades at a high RPM. This is why aircraft such as the F-15 and A-10 are larger on radar from the front than the physical size of their aircraft. In other words, the compressors literally make these aircraft project their presence on radar. This is why we hid them with S-ducts. From there, it was time to design the wings. The wings were cut from my custom cross-section featuring a standard wing with a low to moderate lift coefficient. The leading edge of these wings was modified to produce a wedge shape, therefore making the wings stealthier. These stealth leading edges can be found on many vehicles from the F-117 to the B-2 for reducing cross-section. Using these leading edge devices, I was able to achieve a very low frontal cross-section without sweeping the wings back, which was my goal to maintain the wing shape similar to the real-life A10. I used the blueprint tool from earlier to shape these wings with the same approximate size and position as the wings of the real-life Warthog. On top of this, a root extension was added to the leading and trailing edge for future reference so I could secure a small internal weapons bay and landing gear bay underneath this root extension. The internal bay underneath the vehicle was small due to the high diameter of the engine ducting. However, I used these extensions to make the bays as large as possible. The extensions also allowed me to position the landing gear in the same approximate place as the real A10 whilst maintaining radar stealth shaping. This all, of course, comes at the cost of making the aircraft a little bit fatter. Much like its real-life counterpart, the Stealth A10 featured an offset front gear to fit the gun, achieving an aesthetic from the ground that is equal parts asymmetric and beautiful. The asymmetry with the gun and landing gear is one of my favorite parts of the real-life A10. Speaking of the gun, it was finally time to design the gun port for the vehicle. The gun was nothing short of a behemoth. This weapon had an utterly massive ammunition drum of 1,300 rounds of 30 by 173mm munitions. To get the tracerless look of the traditional A10 firing belts, I file edited the weapon tracers to appear once every 4,000 rounds, therefore only firing a tracer with the very first bullet in the belt. The sheer size and weight of this gun was a major engineering feat in the first place, the weight, balance, and internal spacing becoming an engineering challenge in the nose of the vehicle. To make the vehicle radar stealth, the gun port was covered by an opening and closing weapon door assigned to the T key as a toggle switch. Due to the size of the Warthog's stealth-shaped nose, we were also able to include a very small nose radar. This radar, along with some side radars and IR sensory equipment for MAW, allowed the pilot to more effectively spot air, ground, and sea targets. This means that the pilots of this vehicle would have more situational awareness than the pilots of the previous generation, hopefully preventing some of the infamous friendly fire incidents of the A10 in the past. We would also be including a small, of course only modeled and simulated, weapons targeting system on the bottom of the vehicle. After ripping assets from previous designs for a quick cockpit, I moved on to the paint of the vehicle. The paint was inspired by the mirror coat you see on some modern Navy F-35s, which is rumored to reduce IR signature due to its reflective nature, as well as potentially not have the same rust problems as the traditional radar coatings. For texturing, I hand-painted each stealth panel for the aircraft, as well as putting some minor weathering around each panel line, as well as lines for the landing gear and gun port. A small amount of soot was also put on the gun port and engine exhaust to pretend that this plane was a bit dirty, as I'd expect any A10 to be. Does this get in the way of the radar absorbing materials? Well, I don't know. It's not real RAM anyway, so I'm not going to worry about it. But we were just about done. It was finally time to fly out, so I'll see you guys in the sky where we'll talk about some of the features of the vehicle as well as how it stacks up to the real A10. See ya there. Now all this is cool, but the question remains, why would we fly a stealth A-10? And while it is possible, it encounters the same problem as many other conceptual aircraft upgrades. It just isn't practical. To make the A-10 stealth, and effective at stealth, you need an entirely new airframe. Complete high-tech multiple redundant systems, full airframe upgrade, internal weapons bay, and other stealth systems are insanely expensive. The number one use for this vehicle would most likely be seed or suppression of enemy air defense. This is one of the most dangerous roles in air combat. Seed is conducted by taking out enemy air defense emplacements using cluster, GPS-guided, laser-guided, or anti-radiation or anti-radar reverse beam riding munitions. As this role involves going toe-to-toe with anti-aircraft weapon systems, it's often considered one of the most dangerous roles in air-to-air combat, as you're fighting weapons specifically designed to eliminate aircraft. This is the most believable role the stealth A-10 can fill. However, we already designed a plane for that nearly half a century ago, the F-117. Furthermore, if you need a seed plane, why would you include a gun in the nose? Like, why make it an A-10 at all, and why not build something more intentionally designed to counter AA systems? Well, honestly, all these questions don't really have an answer, and it's why the A-10 can't ultimately be a stealth plane. And if it were, you'd probably be building a new plane altogether. Unfortunately, the use of low-speed attack aircraft is currently at a trade-off. You can either use the low-speed precision coin aircraft, in which the A-10 is too expensive and overkill, or you can use the high-speed stealth planes for equal adversary engagement, in which the A-10 would never stand a chance. This is why the A-10 doesn't really have a place in modern combat. However, so much love exists in the community for the A-10. From both the infantry and the general public, the A-10 is a highly beloved vehicle. And for that fact alone, I wouldn't call the A-10 completely useless, even if most of its advantages can be completed better by other aircraft designs. So my question to you all is, do you think the stealth A-10 could be effective? Furthermore, how do you think this A-10 could be upgraded in the future to keep it flying? Or is it even worth it? Let me know what you guys think in the comments below. I hope you guys all enjoyed the video, as this was my first video back for quite a while now. See you all in the next one. Goodbye.